What I've been looking at lately is there are many, many theorists who say that there is not just subjective objective, there's an in between. And that in between is very, very important. Some of these theorists even say that's actually where we live.
Welcome to the Passing Through Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. I am delighted because I have a special treat for you. I have the honor of welcoming Robert Falconer back to the Passing Through podcast for the third time. Bob is an influential IFS therapist. He's an international educator, he's an author, and he has 5 decades of experience in healing. In this talk, we discuss the power of healing in groups. Bob talks about his time practicing ecstatic dance, the importance of spirit and community in healing. We talk about the IFS concept of self. We talk about human porosity, the link between unattached burdens and ancestors, animist concepts of relationality, and human beings as a sort of living bridge between the spiritual and material worlds. We cover a lot of other things too. This is a favorite conversation of mine. It's always a joy to speak with Bob, and this time was no exception. I hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. If you're curious to find Bob, you can go to his website, robertfalconer.us. You could buy his books. You could attend one of his upcoming workshops. You can find his content on YouTube. He is all over the place. He is prolific. He has an upcoming event on trauma, spirituality, and IFS, which sounds really great. And all of the links to all of that will be in the show notes. As always, be good to one another, and let's just jump right in. So instead of doing the welcome thing, I just want to talk about what's on the top of my mind, I guess, because since we last spoke, I have been on a bit of a journey of discovery, experience, group work, and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm really curious about your insights in terms of the healing that happens in groups. Because whether we look at it in terms of indigenous cultures or Buddhist sanghas or ancient shamanic tradition, it seems like healing often happens in groups. And I wonder if you might have any thoughts on why that might be. Why are groups more powerful than one-on-one?
Well, our minds are porous. So when we're together with a bunch of like minded people, the field we inhabit becomes stronger. And I think if you viewed us as a field phenomena, it would totally make sense. And that we are nodes in a field. William James had the beautiful image that he said, we look like islands in the ocean. But if you pay attention closely enough, you realize that all the islands come from the same seafloor.
Hmm.
So if you just sort of bring that up to date using field theory, it makes sense that when you're together in a room, it would have a resonating effect. And I want to mention that I think the evidence is overwhelming now that all the most ancient spiritual methods of humanity involve dance and community. And if you look at like the San, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, they have these incredibly beautiful dance rituals that go all night long. And it's amazing because they have language that's almost exactly like the Kundalini language in India, who they could not have had any contact with. They talk about dancing until the num, the sacred energy in their down in their pelvis, gets heated up enough to come up the spine, and then they become suffused with this healing energy, and they can go around and heal others with their hands. And it takes all night group dance. And I think this early Christianity, there's a lot of evidence there was group dance. I was just watching some videos. A lot of Hasidic Jewish groups still have these ecstatic dances. It's really beautiful. And I think that's something we've largely lost, at least from our official spiritual culture, but you can't kill it off. So it comes back as raves and I mean, it's wonderful it's still there, and it's too bad it's lost its spiritual context because could be so much more than it is these days. That was a long-winded answer, wasn't it?
I love it though because you have opened up new lines of questioning that I wanted to dig in deeper into because I've observed this as well. Something about dance and movement and song connects us in a way that is very mystical, and I wonder why why dance? Why coming together as a community and moving our bodies together does this unlock some new energy or new potential?
Oh, there's so much I could say about that. You know, I usually don't talk about this very much anymore, but for 30 or so years, I was involved in the ecstatic dance community
Oh wow.
and studied with a lot of the really, really wonderful, marvelous people in that community. Um, there are very erudite theories about the origins of human culture are from group rhythmical activity, group dance. And I could describe those in some detail if you want. Barbara Ehrenreich, who I think is an underappreciated intellectual because, you know, she stayed away from the universities and was her own independent intellectual. She wrote a wonderful book. I think it's titled The End of Collective Joy.
Mm.
And she started out by pointing out that the one thing the missionaries and the Westerners most hated when they went to visit non-Western societies was the ecstatic dance. And they were always saying, "Oh, these horrible, disgusting things, they always end in orgies." But they almost never ended in orgies. They ended in ecstatic, direct religious experience. And she said, there's been a long struggle against these, but it was the period of the Reformation, Counter Reformation, where our last vestiges of ecstatic joy in Europe, group ecstatic joy, were killed off. And group ecstatic joy is profoundly healing. It is a mode of healing that I think can do more than modern psychotherapy.
Mm.
It can create sudden, profound, life changing experiences in people. I go back a little further than that. I think this stuff started disappearing in ancient Greece. And I think Euripides' play, The Bacchae, is sort of like provides a mythology that, or a dramatic expression of what we've done to the ecstatic. In that play, Bacchus, you know, came to this area and all the women and a few men, but it was primarily female. Ecstasy is primarily a female. The females lead in ecstasy. But anyway, they would all go up on the mountains and do these wild dances and tear animals apart with their bare hands, and they would be gone for days and days. And the king of Thebes, where this was going on, Pentheus, didn't think this was such, he didn't like it. And actually, Bacchus came to him disguised, and he sort of, you know, cursed out Bacchus, and Bacchus did not go for this. So the god had have somebody else give Pentheus the idea that, oh, I'll just go out there disguised and see if I can disrupt all these women. And he went out there disguised, and his own mother, in her frenzies, tore him apart and killed him, put his head on a staff, and danced back into town with his head on the staff.
I hate
And
when that happens.
and then she woke up and realized what she'd done, and she was exiled. And the city went through these devastating famines and almost completely fell apart, and the god had his vengeance. And I take it the message from this play: you do not mess with the god of ecstasy. It will come back and raise hell.
Hmm.
And we haven't learned that lesson. But it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back. Another super important point, and this moving together in rhythm is just profoundly influential on who we are. And when we don't have it in a good way, an ecstatic way like this, where it opens us to spirit and healing, it comes back in a horrible form. I'm thinking of the goose stepping Nazis. That's also moving together in rhythm. You know,
Hmm.
the Soviet Union, they had these masses of huge masses of people moving together in rhythm. Or you look at the films of the Nuremberg rallies, it's incredible the hypnotic power of that mass rhythmic, back and forth, the call and response. The call and response of his yelling out Sieg Heil and then these tens of thousands of people yelling it back. The call and response was a feature of early religious communal ecstatic experience. It's like they've taken this and turned it into something very, very powerful in a very dark way. And I think the fact that we tried to exile this is a big reason why this could happen. If we could welcome it back in a good way, in a positive way, it wouldn't be there, for totalitarian regimes to use.
Wow, I got chills when you said that. I had never made that link before of what happens when you take collective movement together and you sort of weaponize it and turn it into something nefarious and malevolent. And yeah, that marching and that very rigid, stiff movement, it's very haunting to think of it in those terms, that it is effectively generating a kind of energetic field of threat and ill will.
Yeah, and Mao, and you see all these young Chinese with the red book chanting rhythmically and waving their arms. Same thing.
Hmm. And I guess to step back a little bit, not stiffly but gracefully, um, why is it so threatening to power? Why did the kings, why did the imperialists, why did the colonizers come in and try to stamp out dance? What are they afraid of being undermined? Are they the, something must be repellent to them, as you said, that this was one of the things that they found revolting.
Yeah, the number one thing that the missionaries wrote back about being disgusted by. And I think it's not only the imperialist colonialist powers who hated this, it's the religious authorities. I think any domination structure, any organized system that wants to control you hates this stuff. People who are directly have contact with spirit themselves and experience spirit in their bodies, they're really hard to control. Really hard, or maybe impossible. And if you rip that direct connection away from them, they're really easy to control. In this day and age, you can sell them all sorts of useless garbage they don't need. So they'll be in debt and have to work for the rest of their lives. And, you can get them into armies so any control system is going to do the best it can to destroy direct spiritual connection in all the citizens, including the churches. I just made a lot of enemies, didn't I?
But but what's great about that? I I'm in circles often here in Europe and many countries in Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Austria, all over the place. And often there are religious people in these circles. And they commonly say that in church, one of the reasons that they're in these circles trying to build community with strangers is because they feel sort of orphaned by their faith, by their church. They don't connect with the people there. There's a hollow where there should be a sense of wholeness.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. One thing most of us I'm not really in the academic world. I'm allergic to that stuff, but I'm kind of on the fringes. But almost everybody in the academic world ignores and hates the Pentecostal evangelicals. This is willful blindness and stupidity. Oh, I should be nicer. My 12-year-old part is up and running my mouth today. If you think about it, there were zero of them until 1906, the Azusa Street revival. It was all born then. They're now over 500 million all over the world, and it's growing very rapidly. However obnoxious what they say is to your ideology, they deserve respectful study. I mean, come on, gang, get your head out of where the sun don't shine. This is important and it's significant. And what are they offering? I think it's primarily direct personal experience of connection to spirit, very often involving dramatic, forceful movement. Maybe not dance, but song, rhythm, all the other elements.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. I see your point there, and I want to explore the community aspect of this because we've talked mostly about the movement and being together in the space, but there's something also about the community in these spaces or in these rituals or ceremonies that is also very important because if you're alone or with one other person dancing, it doesn't have the same kind of potency somehow.
It often doesn't, it can for people, but I get your point. It's much easier to access these states communally. I'm going to mention somebody who's really obscure, but I think very important and overlooked in this area. A historian named O'Neill. I'm forgetting his first name right now, but he had a lifelong project. He had realized in World War II, when he was a recruit, that doing this close order drill, when they all marched together in time, some kind of camaraderie that he thought was special and powerful happened in the drill teams that drilled together. And he got really curious, and he nothing had been written about this. And then, because he was a military historian, he looked at what was the guy's name, the Duke of Orange, the Dutchman who defeated the much bigger Spanish armies. And O'Neill thought, well, this is because he trained with drill, close order drill, so that his armies were much better disciplined and much more cohesive. So then he went back and he looked at the earliest human societies. And he said he thinks this moving together in time is the basis of all human civilization. And he said, if you look at all the other primate groups, they don't get much bigger than about a dozen, 20, maybe. And then something happened that allowed us, and we're pretty puny. We're slow. Our claws are pathetic. Our teeth are small. We stand upright, all our vital organs exposed to attack. I mean, this is not a good predator. Not at all. F minus, as a predator. But we took over the planet. And he's saying, why? And he's saying, because somehow, for some reason, a few 100,000 years ago, we could form bands of 100, 150. And he attributes this to moving together in time. And back then, it was rhythmic dance. So this community thing is incredibly important. And if he's right, it's the foundation of human civilization.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm getting vivid images of ancient people just dancing around fire in these states of ecstasy and coming together in community and in large numbers, like you said, I guess unprecedented numbers for primates. I hadn't considered that before, but it's true. And it's beautiful imagery because when you come together as a people like that, you transcend things. It's a transcendent experience and it's quite unlike anything.
Deeply, deeply healing. And you can see how people who want to dominate hate this stuff. The king is going to be scared of a couple hundred people dancing together ecstatically.
Yeah, and you know what comes to me now? There's something about dance and big numbers of people that is emergent. It's unpredictable. It's like you become potentiality shamans.
Mm-hmm.
And this quality of it being unpredictable, unknown, emergent, uncontrollable is also what makes it so exhilarating and so connective and so powerful.
One of the things that I learned early on is that when you're dancing, it really becomes good when you're no longer dancing, you are being danced.
Mm.
And there are many. I studied with Anna Halprin, Gabrielle Roth, Susan Harper, one of the founders of Continuum, many other wonderful people, and they all somehow had the magic to get a room full of people to the place where everyone was being danced. And in that state, my body and many other people's bodies could do things we normally could not do at all without injury. Usually, some people got injured, but not many.
Yeah, like this phenomenon of walking on hot coals or putting something sharp in your mouth and not getting cut by it.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't test it like that, but I could dance for 6 hours straight, in a very, and leap and jump and do things I just know my body cannot normally do.
Mm. Yeah, like Spider-Man, just backflips and crawling up the walls and
Far, but yeah, it's clear to me.
hmm. Another thought comes to me. We're talking about physical movement right now, and I I think there might be an analog between physical movement and a kind of interior movement because when I'm in circles, everyone's stationary, everyone's still, and we're in a process where they describe it as a group contemplative practice. So everyone is really looking and listening what's inside of them that wants to come out. They call it move to speak. So you're kind of interrogating this energetic liminal space inside of yourself. So there's a lot of inner movement. And do you think that when you are in a space like this, similar things can happen, similar ecstatic states, similar transcendent experiences are possible because it's a different kind of movement?
But yeah, I think so. And again, I would go back to that field analogy. You excite a field, the every node in it is going to be affected.
Hmm.
The Quaker meetings were like this, a traditional way like this. They didn't have ministers. You would sit usually in a circle, sometimes not, and people would just wait and listen and wait until you had something to say that would improve upon God's silence. Now that's a pretty high standard.
Yeah, and that's what these meetings are. It's the same concept. I don't know if it takes inspiration from Quaker meetings. I guess it does. And I've achieved these states. Like there were times where I felt like I was on a psychoactive substance. Like I was on MDMA, feeling deep love and connection and gratitude and admiration. There were other times where I felt I was on psilocybin and there was horror and terror and dread even. And it's weird that these things can be experienced with such potency sober without any substance.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm a big fan of psychedelic assisted healing. I think it's super important, helps so many people, and it's not necessary. Definitely not. This idea that mind is porous is something that's very important to me. And working with all in IFS, we call them unattached burdens. A more normal name would be entities, or I prefer the anthropological term spirit possession. That's a very large part of the people I see, which implies a porous mind. Stuff can get into you from outside of you. So I can give you tons of research that shows our minds are porous. A lot of our cognition and all of that is outside of us, and gets into us. It's distributed. What I've been looking at lately is there are many theorists who say that there is not just subjective objective. There's an in between. And that in between is very important. Some of these theorists even say that's actually where we live. Bateson said long ago that mind and environment have evolved together. To try and understand one without reference to the other is ridiculous and doomed to failure.
Yes.
That's what modern psychology does. Totally. And a lot of modern psychology is ridiculous and doomed to failure. Oh, that 12-year-old, he's back. He's having a good time today. But If that's true, what's really important is this in between realm, the relationship. And Ian McGilchrist says the relationship is prior to the relata. The relationship comes before the things that are being related. It actually creates them in a way. And everything's a process. So if you actually could adopt McGilchrist's worldview, what matters is the relationship, and it's not between things, it's between processes. This is like, I mean, it's easy enough to think. Well, it's not that easy to think, but to actually live from that is really difficult, would transform you utterly. John Vervaeke, a sort of famous and very straight professor of cognitive psychology at the University of Toronto, he's come up with this terminology. There's the subjective, the transjective, and the objective. And a really good example of the transjective is this whole idea of affordances. I think the guy's name was Gibson, the philosopher who came up with this idea. He said, what we perceive in the world is not the thing. We perceive the affordance it offers us. Like when we see a staircase, we perceive something that will help us go up or down. When we see a coffee cup's handle, it's something we could grab. That's what we perceive, and that's the affordance. Now, if you think about this just for a minute, the affordance is not objective, it's not out there, and it's not subjective, it's not in you, it's in that in between space. And so, this in between space is key, crucial to our healthy functioning, and we ignore it and pretend it doesn't even exist. Now, as I've been researching this, the Sufis have been talking about this for over 1,000 years. They call it Barzakh. They compare it to an isthmus, a thin little strip of land connecting two continents. And they say, we humans are Barzakh. We are supposed to be like this. It's not something we get beyond. And one of the, I don't read Arabic or Persian, so this is all very secondhand. One of the major things we're the Barzakh for is the connection between material and spiritual. That's why we're here. And so we completely ignore this stuff and pretend it doesn't exist. And here there are these very, very deep thinkers saying it is the ground of our being. So we need to have some major changes. One other thing I'll say is that even thinking about these ideas actually is quite difficult because the opposite ideas are built into the grammar of our language. But thinking about it isn't really what matters. It's living from these ideas. And that is a radical, fundamental shift in who we are. I think one we need to make and one that's incredibly beneficial. But it's not easy.
I I ho- I don't even know how to respond to this. You're talking about some of my favorite, most alive topics in me at the moment. Everything you just said, I think, is so important and almost bears repeating. And I would love to just dig deeper into these things because, as you said, people don't talk about them enough. They are occluded by our language, by our ontologies, our epistemologies, modern cosmology. Everything kind of obscures this truth. And for me lately, I have been very intrigued by animism, animist traditions, because this is at the heart of animism.
Yep.
It's relationship, it's connection, it's realizing that we are relationships. We don't exist in the absence of relationship. Nothing does. And to the food we eat, I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh says to see the cloud and the piece of paper. It's all connected. It's the the sun is inside of us. When you have syrup out of a tree, it's literally like liquid sunlight. There's so much magic all around us, and we've lost this somehow. It's been taken away. The same with the dance and the song and the community. This sense of mystery and mysticism and connection is gone.
Yep. The Max Weber called it the disenchantment of the world.
Mm.
And um, I think, by the way, Thich Nhat Hanh has the most sophisticated language to describe this sort of stuff that's been developed yet. and I'm hoping we'll get better and better language for it. Daniel Siegel, the prominent psychiatrist, neurobiologist, the sort of founder of interpersonal neurobiology, says we need a whole new language. Our grammar and our whole it's hopeless. You can't think clearly with this garbage in your mind. But I think Thich Nhat Hanh is the farthest along that trail. You could consider, I think, fruitfully, group dance as being a way of opening up this barzak and living in this isthmus, this interconnection, this in between space.
Hmm.
And it is incredibly life giving. I think, at the same time, Barbara Ehrenreich was talking about the end of collective joy. A lot of people, Charles Taylor, many others, say this was the beginning of the belief in an idea of a buffered self, that we are independent, enclosed, separate beings. Tanya Luhrmann calls this the citadel model of mind. I have come to believe that this citadel model of mind, which originated about 500 years ago, is the fundamental root cause of the epidemic of mental illness we're living in now.
Hmm.
And it doesn't matter what you think, it matters what you do, what your perceptual systems have in them. If they have in this idea that your brain is contained in this bony little thing here and everything in it is private, it's your property, and it constitutes your identity, you are in trouble. You are in big trouble. You will feel alienated, alone. Your life will seem meaningless, and you will be very, very fragile. Even though that appears very strong, a fortress, you hear one voice in your head that's not yours, you'll shatter. And there's all this evidence that many other cultures on the world get better results with psychotic episodes than we do. And what are we doing? We're exporting our treatment methods that don't work and destroying theirs, which do. You have
Yeah.
to either laugh or cry, or both.
Yeah, some I was gonna say sometimes both. um, yeah, I agree with all of this, and I actually it segues into a question that I had. I was thinking with my partner recently. We were talking about self energy, and we were wondering if there is an external relational component to self energy that isn't internal. Because, when at first we thought of self energy, it's kind of like the Buddhist concept of Buddha nature. It's inside of everyone. It's accessible. It's who you truly are. It's what's real. It's what's at the core of who you are. But then if we take all of what we just said as truth, and we are relational, we are porous, uh, is there, how could I rephrase this? Does self come from within, or does it come from somewhere else?
Okay, great question. Um, Dick has, I believe, intentionally dumbed down the idea of self to make it acceptable to modern academics. And as he ages, as he and I are in our later 70s, he's less interested in dumbing stuff down to make it acceptable. But he's very, very much, he's devoted his life to making IFS an accepted modality of psychotherapy. But Dick now is saying you can consider self as a particle or a field. As a particle, it's something within a person, and each person has their own self, and then each part of the person has its own self too. But then if you really start thinking about it in a big way, it's a wave or a field phenomena. And he even has gone so far to say is there might only be one self. And he talks about this, and I know myself, it's true that in groups, when he's working with someone with a group of people focused on the work, he can do a lot more because that field of self resonates and helps the person and the therapist doing the work. But I think the way Dick, well, I don't know what Dick thinks. Here's what I think. I think the AC description of self is way too small. It has a lot of other characteristics which are unacceptable in the Western world: ecstasy, wonder, awe, euphoria, transcendence, invincible joy, and bigger words, if you have them: exhilaration, luminosity. That's another one. So I think that's what self is really about.
Hmm. I got chills when you were talking about this because it's great to hear you describe self. It almost sounds quantum in a way. It's somehow both. So a field and a particle, and it is the concept of there being one self. That's it resonates with me. It feels true somehow in my experience. That's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think we just have to come to expect that domination structures will almost always organize to destroy this.
Yeah.
Who was it? I think it was Franz Kafka. He was talking about, oh, the revolution came and it was glorious, but it receded and it left the slime of a new bureaucracy.
Hmm. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I, Yeah, I mean, where I am lately is I'm trying to focus on the part of the garden that I can touch, build community with those around me,
Mhm.
access self energy, deepen relationality with others and also the more than human world. And just get more connected into that because these domination structures will continue to try to dominate as they are. You know, we're seeing this rise all across the world. And it feels like if we let that discourage us,
Yeah.
that's a victory for them.
Or if we get involved with fighting them down in the shit with the pigs, I think you're very right. And Ian McGilchrist, who is a totally brilliant, wonderful thinker. He I don't know where he came up with this number, but he said if 3% of the people on the planet could change their consciousness, it would change everything. It's our best hope of transforming the world. So I'm very much with you. I work in my small groups, my therapist trainings, do some bigger groups, do teaching, write my books, try and stay focused on this level. And I also think of it as radical pragmatism.
Hmm.
I can do things that I have a lot of evidence for that reduce human suffering in front of me. That I can do. People ask me these questions about, well, what do you think about the mass extinctions and all these big questions? I don't want to answer them. I don't know. I'm just this old fart on my mountainside in California. I can do this, and I'm going to keep my blinders on and keep doing this because I know in my heart that this does some good. And, all these vast theories, I don't want to play that game. Because
Hmm.
see all I knew quite a few people who went into politics very idealistically, and they all got poisoned. Somebody's got to do it, but it ain't me.
What's that quote from the crooked timber of humanity? Nothing straight can grow. I replace humanity with politics there.
Yeah. Oh,
Mm.
the standard derivation of the word politics is wrong. Everybody thinks it comes from polis, the ancient Greek word for city state. It actually comes from the Greek word poly, meaning many, and ticks, blood sucking parasites.
I've been dealing with a lot of those out here in Poland in the tall grass. I was picking like a dozen of them off of me today in the garden.
Uh, mm,
So I'm familiar with those guys. But I wanted to ask you another puzzling question about self energy. And maybe I have a mistaken concept of this, but my understanding was that with self energy, the goal of IFS is to identify your exiled parts, know your protectors, witness them, have this sense of community with your inner community. And by doing so, you get more access to self and you step into self more. And if we think of it that way, self is kind of like light. Now, that seems like okay, you step into the light. But then I have this question of what does this mean for the Jungian shadow? What do we do with the shadow? Because then, as a byproduct, the shadow seems to get exiled. If we're just light, what does that mean for the shadow? And so I've been trying to reconcile this of what does it mean to step into self and simultaneously integrate the shadow?
Okay. If you're stepping into self and it's exiling the shadow, that would be a self-like part trying to be the boss.
Hmm.
I think a good metaphor or the goal of the way I work, and I think this, I'm pretty sure Dick, and I'm pretty sure this is mainstream IFS, not just Weird Bob. We Most people wander around the planet as an internal civil war, burning up most of their life force fighting themselves. And what we want to do is we want to convert that into an orchestra or an ecstatic dance, which would be my personal metaphor, but a lot of people are freaked out by ecstatic dance. So something like that where all the parts can cooperate in a good way. And in an orchestra, you don't want all the instruments to be violins. That would be really bad. You need all the different instruments. And so we want all the parts as they are. We just want them unburdened, all the gunk off the system. So I think when you get the gunk off the system, there are no bad parts. So I think that's the first round answer to the shadow question is no, these aren't bad parts. They aren't fundamentally bad or wrong. They just got a lot of dirt and garbage splashed on them. And then further down, there are legacy burdens and then unattached burdens and all this weird stuff from the collective unconscious. And some of those do need to be sent away.
Hmm. Well, that's an interesting idea just came to me. Would that imply perhaps that then the true shadow isn't something within us, it's something other that enters us because of the porosity?
No, I don't think so. I think most of what people call the shadow is wounded parts acting out. There's this other stuff too. And even then, when I work with something that's clearly not a part of a person's system and doesn't belong in that person, I do everything I can to help it go to where it can transform and not send it back to the darkness. I think the Brazilian spiritists are way ahead of most modern Western therapists. And we ignore them because they're not from Northern Europe or the United States. So they obviously couldn't have anything valuable to say. But they've had spiritist healing teams in, I think, about 50 psychiatric hospitals in Brazil. And they've been doing this kind of healing for 150 years or so. They believe that any external energy that gets attached to a person is a lost, distressed soul of some deceased human, and it just needs help. It's not an enemy. It's not a demon. It's not Satan. It's another lost soul. The spiritists I've talked to and work with, they say if you run into one of these, it becomes your job to help it. It is as much your client as the person sitting in front of you. I don't go quite that far, but I go a long ways down that road.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like that. It sounds like ancestor work, but the ancestor may not be your direct ancestor.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And there is hard science around epigenetics and legacy burdens now, and there's the Diaz wrestler experiment. So a lot of times I get these people who are hyper rational and go, oh Bob, you're so full of shit. You've been living in California too long, and go away. And I described the Diaz wrestler experiment, and our culture is so bizarre. When you can do this stuff with rats, that means it's real. If you do it with humans, it doesn't really matter. But if you can do it with rats, and you can demonstrate legacy burdens in rats. Do you want me to go through that experiment real quick?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Please.
Okay, Diaz is a PhD psychologist at Emory in Atlanta, Georgia. Wrestler with an R, not a W, is an MD at Harvard. Diaz realized that in the poor Hispanic areas of Atlanta where he grew up, mental illness and addiction tended to run in families. And he thought, could there be something more than just behavioral transmission? So he designed what I think is a brilliant experiment. He took male rats, only males, exposed them to a relatively pleasant smell of a chemical that's sort of like almonds or cherry blossoms. It's a pretty unique smell. And he paired that with an electrical shock until they developed a startle response to the smell. Classic conditioned reflex. He takes sperm from these male rats, impregnates female rats who've never met the male rat, never smelled this chemical. When their pups were old enough, they exhibited the startle response. According to classical theory, that's absolutely impossible. But it happens and it's been replicated, and the pups of the pups do that. In some other experiments that are similar, it's gone down 10 generations. And there's lots of other evidence of epigenetics. And what this means is something could have happened to an ancestor of yours who you don't know anything about and have no contact with whatsoever that profoundly affects your emotional response and way of being in the world. Now, that should open up a door quite a bit to even the most rigid rationalist person. This happens.
I love that. I never considered the parallel between epigenetics and these types of burdens or ancestral burdens. And that's a beautiful way to illustrate that. And it accentuates this concept of relationality, because now our relationality extends not just in the present, but way back into time, which is really important to consider because we're so present focused. But if we think that there could have been some trauma or some event or something that caused something to get stuck, and now it's manifesting inside of us, this helps this make more sense.
Yeah. And there's clearly group trauma also, not just individual. I mean, look at the Holocaust. Rachel Yehuda, oh, she's at some medical school in New York, over 500 peer reviewed papers on the descendants of Holocaust survivors. And they have different neurochemistry. This is not woo woo. This is measured in labs. And that's a group thing. The whole Jewish people were traumatized. You know,
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot to this. Another thing, I have some friends, and I've worked some with some of the tribes in the northern plains of the United States, or some of the First Nations people. Many of them believe we are also in touch and connected to future selves. So
Hmm.
not only does our relationality extend into the past, it also goes into the future. And sometimes that future relationality draws us forward to certain kinds of lives that are very challenging for us.
Yeah, I love that. I just read this incredible book called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a botanist and she's Native American, and she talks about how in those traditions time is more like a lake and less like a river, so that tales from the past, like origin stories, become prophecy because time is this big lake. It's not a river. And so, wow, thinking of that burdens and these energies can be you from the future or an ancestor from the future. That's that's also a bit chilling. Yeah.
Yeah. What matters is not what we say when it comes to deep belief. What we say hardly matters at all. It's what we do and how we live. If I'm looking at someone and trying to figure out what they believe, I usually don't even ask them because we're, oh, us humans are so good at lying to ourselves. It's astounding. Just
Yes.
mind bogglingly astounding. Somebody, I can't remember who said this, great art is our last and best hope of stopping lying to ourselves.
Hmm. I'm happy you said that. Actually, that's a good synchronicity because I lately I've been thinking of the art of storytelling as a key art that's kind of been lost or appropriated by Hollywood or institutions that want to perpetuate oppression. But how story, like dance, was this thing that brought people together and that you could have experience through, and yeah, this kind of art that needs to be revitalized, I think, to give us a new story, to give us the new language that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And just like with the moving together in time, if it's not used in a good way, it's going to be co opted and used in a bad way. Do you want a bunch of people dancing ecstatically together, or do you want marching, goose stepping troops? You know? Yeah, I think an idea that's really important to me can be put very simply. We all live inside a story.
Hmm.
Nobody gets away from that. And the people who claim, oh, I'm not like that, I'm a scientist. Well, that is a story. That's an ideology. And it's not something that's amenable to experiment. So everybody lives inside a story. If we're going to, and we don't choose them. It's like you don't get to choose what you're attracted to or interested in. You know, it happens to you. There are lots of depths of the psyche that are autonomous, and our little ego doesn't get to colonize them. So, if we're going to start to actually move in this level of the story, our language has to become poetic, dramatic, storytelling. This rational, scientific, denotative stuff is not going to cut the mustard. We need something heart centered and imagistic and powerful in those ways. And I think that's how we have at least a chance of modifying the story we live inside.
Hmm.
I could give hard scientific evidence about why that's so important if you want some.
I would almost rather have an imagistic, dramatic, poetic story instead. Yeah, like actually, if you do have maybe you have a story or two that are like favorite stories that you don't get to tell often. Do you have one of those that you'd like to share?
Oh, I have a lot of those. Um, I'm a big admirer of Dr. Milton Erickson. This is not Eric Erickson, the famous developmental psychologist. This guy was a hypnotherapist and psychiatrist of the last century. And he was an incredible healer. One of the things he did early on in his career, he was a psychiatrist, and at that time they still had the big warehouse mental health facilities where they just lock people up. And there was this guy in there who talked word salad, which is just basically nonsense that sort of seems to be like language. And for more than a decade, all they'd been able to do with him, they'd get him out of bed, they'd get him clean, feed him. He'd stand in the hallway facing straight ahead and he'd talk word salad all day, totally isolated from any other human connection. And it looked like he was going to spend the rest of his life that way. Dr. Erickson is given that ward and he notices this guy. And when he has time, he goes over and he stands next to him and just studies the word salad. And then he starts transcribing it, writing down a bunch of the word salad, and he studies it and learns some of the rhythms and grammar and the nonsense syllables. And then one day he goes and stands shoulder to shoulder with the guy, staring straight out like the guy does, and just starts talking word salad back to him. After only 2 or 3 days, in the middle of the word salad, the guy turned to Erickson and said, "Cut it out, Doc," and then snapped right back into his word salad. But just by this simple act of respect, of learning that man's language, he broke through a decades long absolute isolation and got this guy back into relationship. And we refuse to do that. When I was being trained as a therapist, I was told if you encourage somebody or if you help somebody dialogue with the voices they hear, that's malpractice. You'll lose your license.
Hmm.
I, I have a little heat around that issue. But and you can see how Erickson's it's respect, it's fundamental respect of one human being to another.
That's an important story for our times, I think,
Yeah.
because I was just in a community building workshop, one of the first, actually the first official one that we organized. And at the end of the workshop, we were talking with the facilitator team, and someone said something really beautiful where she said, you know what this has taught me, and what I've learned in these circles over the years and years that I've been doing them, is that all things come down to a misunderstanding in language. Like, people don't learn each other's language. They don't give the time and the respect to others to really understand, witness, and be with what the other person is saying. We usually just project, or we think we don't have time, or something like this. And if we could only overcome language, like, we would be so much happier.
Yeah. Get people dancing. And
Yes, yes.
yeah.
And Bob, I know we're coming up on time here. Do you got like 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes? Where are you on time?
I'm pretty open. I don't have a client for till 10:30 my time.
Oh, amazing. I soak up as much time as I can get with you, so I'm happy to talk as much time as you got, because yeah, like, I'd love to hear anything else that you have that maybe you haven't been prompted for, something you've been wanting to share or relay, or story, or anything. I just want to give you space to
Okay.
be.
Well, I am moving in a somewhat new direction. I just completed a book on with a couple Swedenborgian experts on IFS and Emanuel Swedenborg. I think he was
Mm.
a fascinating guy. And clearly, he was very, very spiritual. He talked about demons and angels. I mean, he's, unabashedly, totally spiritual. And I'm going to be doing a big workshop the last 2 Saturdays in May and the first 2 Saturdays in June about spirit and healing. And I've come to believe that, especially with major trauma, people don't heal unless they can find some way to access spirit, something bigger than themselves that's powerful enough to give their lives meaning. And this only matters if it goes into the place of the worst suffering they have ever met. So it's not meaning on a sunny day when you're feeling fine. It's meaning when you're in hell. So those are the areas that have really been calling to me. And modern therapy has exiled spirit. I think Dick is sneaking it in the door with this concept of self. It's like, oh well, we AA and all the 12-step things, they talk about higher power. It's much more clearly spiritual, and they are incredibly successful. And they have both these things. They have community and spirit in the 12-step meetings. The one thing they don't have is group dance. I'll tell another story because the Anna Halpin was another incredible teacher for me. She was a big time professional dancer and dance troupe leader, very avant garde. But then she started using dance for other things. For example, one thing she did is after the Watts riot, huge black versus white riots in Los Angeles quite a while ago, she went down there and organized dancers, like 40 black people and 40 white people, and had them dancing very, very high energy, kind of dance, and then had the two groups come together like this as a way to heal the trauma of the war. So she was a quite a small, frail-looking little Jewish woman. I mean, but she was a source of power on the planet. Anyway, she had this process of working with images and dance. And one time she did this self-portrait of herself, and there was a gray mass in her lower stomach. And she wanted to exit out, but she thought, nah. She went to the doctor and checked it out. She had cancer. She had colon cancer, and they cut it out. And for the rest of her life, she had to wear a colostomy bag. But then it came back, and they told her, you're going to die, and there's nothing we can do this time. So she made another self portrait of herself, front and back. And the front sort of looked kind of normal, but the back was all dark and it had all this black stuff all over it. And then she gathered her family around her and had a drummer and danced in front of that thing. And so when she had the back of that image up, she started howling like an animal and clawing at the space in front of her and dancing full energy. And she collapsed to the ground and went up and kept dancing. And then finally turned the thing around and was able to dance with the front of her body. She went into remission. She lived to be 100. She was teaching dance up to 99. All those doctors who told her she'd be dead died long before. So she got into using rhythmic movement, dance, and imagery, completely bypassing speech and theories and all that stuff. And she had developed ways of moving back and forth between an image and a movement to create healing. Not only internal personal healing, like with her cancer, but also external social healing, like with the Watts riots.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. And the institute she founded is still there, the Tamalpa Institute. I don't have anything to do with them. I did go there for a year because I met her and had this unbelievable experience myself with her, dropped my life and went up there and studied for a year with her.
Wow. I love that. I didn't know any of this about you and your history, about this connection to dance and movement and the healing nature of it. So I love hearing these stories and exploring this topic.
Oh, let me say something else. I was the kind of kid who was too shy and uptight to ever go to the high school dances. I couldn't stand that dancing with girls and wondering would everybody say no. It was just so painful. So for me to become a devotee of this was really a huge transformation. And it's a great way for people to release a lot of anger too. It's not just
Mm.
pounding pillows, it's using your whole body for maybe 6 hours a day for 5 days in a row.
It's funny that you say that. It triggers a memory in me because before in our conversation earlier in our conversation you mentioned you weren't dancing, you were being danced. And it's like this method, this dance took you, even though it was something that you were uncomfortable with naturally. And for me right now, this community building model that I'm inside of, I struggle a lot with that feeling of rejection in conversation or anxiety or discomfort just opening up to people. And the
Mhm,
thing that has seduced me, that has brought me into the fold, is the thing that demands that I do this. And so there's some interesting irony. The way things move and work are very mysterious in this way.
mhm. Yeah. I think over and over again that the smartest and wisest people in our planet are in kindergarten. And most of us are still wearing loaded diapers. And these people who think they've got a theory of everything, oh, just a few more years, we'll get that. They're crazy. We know almost nothing. William Butler Yeats, the great poet, had this image. He said, imagine all human knowledge is one little bubble, with those iridescent colors moving all around it. Now, that bubble is part of a small patch of sea foam with thousands and thousands of bubbles in a small beach, in an insignificant cove on a vast dark sea.
Wow. I'm gonna have to memorize that one. That is incredible.
Yeah, and I did not like that idea because I want to be the expert. I want to know, oh, I got some arrogant parts. I've had to struggle with them for quite a while. Of course, they're based on deep insecurity behind them, but I wanted to be the expert. So accepting this that I'm a kid in diapers was really hard. But it's actually really liberating and a lot of fun because kids of that age, they can discover, they can play, they can do all this stuff, and the universe is just endless expansion and awe and wonder.
You know, I a few weeks ago I went to my first holotropic breathwork workshop, which you want to talk about field. I didn't know the madness that was happening around me because I was breathing first. And after that experience, you're breathing for 3 hours. I came to, and during those 3 hours that I was in, it felt like a trance. My body had dissolved and I was in a void of peace. There was just nothing. And it was so nice and so, there was nothing about it. It was a void. And I got back into my body, and there's more things that happened. I don't want to bore you with a long story, but after the experience, they invited us to go into the next room where you had the ability to make a mandala. And this is an important part of the process where you can try to express what just happened. And for my whole life, I've been very uncomfortable with like getting things on my hand for some reason, like grease, paint, juice, whatever it is. And I went into this room and I saw all these colors and they were so vibrant and so full that I just grabbed the purple paint and green paint like it was condiments at a hot dog stand or something, and just squeezed the paint into my hands, and I was like a child just painting all over these mandalas. And what you just said triggered this memory of just, it was so childish. Like I felt like I was in kindergarten. Like I was just loving the sensation and the color smear and just the beauty of just playing with paint like a baby. It was wild.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Now, I find that every time I get one question or issue settled, at least to my temporary satisfaction, it opens up 10 more, even bigger ones. And
Hmm.
I used to get disappointed in that, but now I just find this absolutely delightful.
Do you have one for as an example that you'd like to give?
Well, I think I'm beginning to understand this issue of porosity of mind and how, even though I say I'm beginning to understand this issue of porosity of mind, actually living from that realization is a whole nother thing. Many orders of magnitude more difficult. And I can sort of feel my way into that a little bit with the help of friends, nature, medicine, all sorts of stuff. But I'm, just as the intellectual realization and some cracks in the wall, all that fell apart. Oh my lord, there's this whole vast world out here that I have been stone blind to. There's a quote from a famous anthropologist, Sordus, who studied witchcraft and demons in Africa. And he said, well, the most powerful demons are always the hidden ones. So it's what we don't see. And we don't see this porosity of mind. And then look what it does. If we ignore this communal ecstasy, we get stormtroopers marching by the 10,000s. So that's a very powerful demon.
I like this topic that you just brought up, though, about what it means from a practical perspective to live knowing that the mind is and the body, who you are is porous. Does it have other implications for you? Because, for example, for me, I've been trying to live with this as well because it's an animist thing. I try to wake up and thank the sun and the stars and the moon and the insects and the water and all of the elements, and develop this relationship with them. But to me, that seems like a kind of baby step. Like there are probably other things to do from a
All we get
practical
to do
sense.
these days is baby celebrate them. Uh, yeah, to me, I find it incredibly important to put my feet on earth, not pavement, not asphalt, not house floor, every day, and more than just a little bit. It, you know, I usually have a half hour. I can do that every day because I live up here in the woods. So that's one thing I do. And I try to have a relational. Oh, here we could go off onto a whole nother topic. Why don't I do this and tell this one story, and then I really got to quit because I need a little time before my
Okay.
next. Um, I believe that spirituality or connection to beings who don't have a physical body also has to have this relational nature to it. And the ancient Greeks talked about daimons, and the Christians later turned this word into demon. But for the ancient Greeks, it wasn't bad. For example, Socrates had a daimon. The father of Western philosophy heard voices his whole life and based his major life decisions on what the voices told him. This is something they don't tell you in school usually. But anyway, the daimons were this intermediate realm of divine or semi divine beings, and humans needed to relate to them because that's what's next to us. And among the Neoplatonists, especially one called Iamblichus, they had complex ways of relating to these daimons. I believe this is native Western shamanism that largely has been destroyed and intentionally destroyed, especially during the witchcraft craze later. Was a well organized attempt to destroy the last remnants of European shamanism. Anyway, that's a little bit to the side. Iamblichus had all these ways of helping people relate to the daimonic realm, calling spirits down, going for soul journeys like the classical shamans, and visiting their realm and interacting with them and all kinds of stuff. This guy, David Gordon White, an incredible scholar, started studying this kind of level of interaction. He's a Sanskrit scholar in India, in Central Asia, in the Middle East, and in Europe. And he says at this very basic level, and he focused a lot on genus loci, gods of a location. He said, well, they're all different mountains, but the form of this kind of worship, it's interactional, relational, it's the same in all these places. So Charles Stang from the Harvard Divinity School was analyzing David Gordon White's work, and he said, if you think about it, this is the fundamental underlying ocean of human spirituality. And all the major religions are just waves upon this ocean. I think that's a very beautiful idea. And, Iamblichus and many of the other Neoplatonists would say we have to relate to this daimonic realm. Above that, there's the nous, the mind, the realm of Platonic ideas. Above that, there's the one. And well, it's great there's the one, but that's so far away from us. you know, we're not ready for that yet. And then I started noticing like the Yoruba in Africa, they have a very, very similar system with a daimonic realm. They don't use that word, of course. And then gods above that, and then a Deus absconditus, a founding great God who's so far away it barely matters, except he created everything. And what they've done, a little detail, in addition to the daimons that the Neoplatonists saw, the Yoruba added ancestors. They're a very big part of that realm. So I started seeing how this model fit the people I've worked with in the Sioux and Crow and Northern Cheyenne tribes. And they have this basically the same kind of model, but they've got the daimons, they've got the ancestors, and they also hold animals. So they have an even larger intermediate realm. And this kind of spirituality, relational and interactive with the daimonic realm, has been totally shamed and excluded. And I think for most of us, for me personally, it's the one we need because it's the one that can live and touch our hearts and can change who we are in the world. Okay.
Yes.
Do I sound like a preacher? Uh-oh.
No, no, not at all. You're saying things that I am discovering as well. So to hear you saying them makes me feel like I'm on the right track. So it's very comforting to hear you say these things, because I'm just nodding my head and saying yes, and it's resonating and it's there, and so I see you as just a font of wisdom and experience. So to hear you say these things is important to me. So I'm very thankful that you shared that. And
And I'm
if we
also
had more
bullshit sometimes, so careful. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to talk longer and see, like, knowing this, having this as a foundation. Maybe this could be a future talk, but taking that as our foundation, what does life look like then? How do we enter respectfully into relationship? Like when I'm out in the forest and I piss on a tree, is this desecration, or does the tree welcome it? So like these basic questions, I don't have the answers to them, and I would love to dig into these kind of topics more.
Yeah, I would say dance with the trees and sing to them, and they'll tell you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. The great closing words. Is there anything you want to promote before we close out?
That workshop that's coming up at ifsca.ca on spirit, trauma, and healing. My website, robertfalconer.us, tons of stuff, a lot of it free, and links to books and all sorts of other stuff.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, great talking to you. Take care.
You too, Bob.
Bye bye.
Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener. Thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it, buy a billboard somewhere next to a highway promoting it. I mean, I'm kidding, of course, but your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.